On today's episode of Zounds, the enduring story of the Norman origins of the words beef, pork, venison, and mutton. An oft-repeated tale reports that during Norman Britain, Germanic-speaking peasants weren't allowed to eat certain animals, but they were allowed to raise them. And it is from this social divide that the modern words for the animal, cow, pig, deer, and sheep, are all Germanic, and the words for the meat, beef, pork, venison, and mutton, are all French. Now, as much as I, a massive language nerd, would love to be able to tell you that this is true, it is not. It is a lovely story with a kernel of truth. The animal words are Germanic and the meat words are French, but the etymology is false for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the story spans 1,200 years. Language evolves and changes rapidly, as does society, so a distinction like this is unlikely to last that long. And it hasn't. The division between the words for meat and animal is a relatively modern development. The words cow and beef did not evolve the delineated meanings that they have today until the 1700s. Prior to this, the word cow largely meant the female animal, having not yet undergone the evolution to become the word for the basic unit of the bovine species. The word cow was also not just for the animal. There are texts from the 1600s that refer to eating and abstaining from eating cow. The word beef was not exclusively used for the meat either. There are texts with the word beef referring to the animal as far back as 1222 in English. In a 17th century text called The Voyage of the Sieur Le Maire to the Canary Islands, the author describes the dining practices of the locals as sometimes they buy a beef expressly to devour him. In a 1668 essay Towards a Real Character, John Wilkins outlines the space and nourishment required for all the animals aboard Noah's Ark, saying, and what proportion each of them may bear, either to a beef or a sheep or a wolf, and then what kind of room may be allotted to the making of sufficient stalls for their reception. It's also worth noting that the use of the word beef to refer to the animal has not been lost. It is maintained in communities across the Anglosphere where speakers often refer to animals as beefs, particularly in North America. Now, the same historical distribution holds true for the word mutton, which was used for the animal as late as 1579 in the English translation of Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Grecians and Romans. The author actually uses the word mutton for both the animal and the meat on the same page. The word pig is a little bit different. The word was used for both the meat and the animal right through the 1600s. The Liber Curiae Cocorum, an English cookbook that dates to 1430, uses pork and pig, with overlapping meanings in some places. But the word pork was used more commonly for pieces of meat, and pig was used for the whole roasted animal, a meaning that is maintained in the phrases pig roast and suckling pig, which have been around in the English language since the 1100s. So if English speakers have long been able to cook a pig and call it a pig, but it becomes pork when they put only certain pieces of it on a plate, how does that fit with the proposed etymology? Words for other parts of the animal also throw a wrench in the works. For example, ham. This is an Old English word that meant back of the knee, which by association came to mean the thigh, and in the 1600s was extended to the hock of the animal, becoming later the meat, and then the sandwich meat. If the etymological story of French versus Germanic were to hold true, we should all still be using the Anglo-Norman word gambon for that cut of meat, which some speakers are, as the word gammon still exists in certain varieties of English. But ham is the more widely purchased meat product. And the more you look into the names for cuts of meats, the origins do not divide nicely across a sociolinguistic divide. Now let's zoom out and ask a couple of broader questions. Firstly, what words did the Normans use for food and animals? Though few Norman cookbooks have survived, there are examples of the words beef, mutton, and pork being used for both animal and meat. Critically though, in Anglo-Norman and Old French, the word venison meant meat of any large game, particularly boar and sometimes deer. That word did not solidify a meaning of deer meat until well into the 1800s. A more pressing question is, what about animals like chicken and rabbit, where the word is the same for both the meat and the animal? There is archaeological evidence that after the Norman invasion, chicken increased in popularity as a dish, for all classes. The most commonly used Norman French word for chicken was pullet. This word starts appearing in English texts as early as the 1200s. In the form of curry, a 14th century collection of medieval English recipes, the words capons, chickens, hens, and pullets all feature. In terms of rabbit, in surviving Norman texts, conis or conil is the most common word for both the animal and the meat. Conings, conies, and hares all make appearances in recipes and stories from this time, with cookbooks until the late 1500s primarily using coney, a word that derives from the Anglo-French word conis. But the Germanic word rabbit doesn't overtake as a dominant word for the meat until the 1600s. And I'll wrap up with the question I ask anyone who repeats the story to me. What about salmon? In pre-Norman Britain, salmon was not a food of the aristocracy. It was eaten by peasants and was for a time considered lower-class food. During Norman Britain, there is evidence that both English and French speakers ate salmon. The Germanic root for salmon is lox. This was used for the animal and the meat until the 1500s, as was the word salmon. But around about that time, the Norman French word salmon started to take over, with lox being pushed into the margins. Now the word salmon is used for the animal and the meat, and the word lox, if speakers use it at all, is a fancy word for expensive smoked salmon. So there is a lot of history over the past 1200 years that has adjusted and evolved how these words are used. Indeed, the words cow, sheep, deer, and pig are all Germanic in origin, but there's no direct line of connection to Norman Britain. The lexical division between words for meat and animal is more a product of modern societies, in which speakers are heavily influenced by industrial agriculture. Speakers of all languages in Norman and medieval Britain lived a more agrarian lifestyle, cheek to jowl with livestock, as it were. Modern speakers of English exist in and are influenced by capitalistic food culture, and we generally have a crisper division between animals and meats. A fact which is evidenced by another pair of words, pigeon and dove. Pigeon is French in origin and dove is Germanic, but in common modern parlance, dove is the word for the white celebratory animal, while pigeon is the word for the grey animal often deemed a pest. But the distinction is not universal, and there is still much overlap between the words pigeon and dove. Though in the Middle Ages, pigeon was widely consumed by all classes, and many words were in use during this period. Norman French used the words pigeon and colombe for both the bird and the meat, while Old English used the words dove and culver. Many contemporary cookbooks have recipes for doves, including phrases like stock doves, wood doves, and even culver doves. To further complicate matters, the word for a group of pigeons, flock, is from Old English, and the word for a group of doves, dule, is from Old French. But most importantly, there are no records that the Normans prohibited the English lower class from eating certain meats. In fact, there is evidence that they increased the dietary variety in Britain and stabilized agriculture, proliferating pig and chicken farming and bringing in new items like pepper. While it was likely true that members of the lower classes sometimes couldn't afford certain products, this does not translate to them never eating them, and it definitely does not extend to modern words evolving from separate languages. So given this, and the origins and current meanings of words like ham, gammon, pigeon, and even steak, we cannot conclude any etymology of division between beef and cow that dates to the Norman times. What we can conclude is that English speakers during the Norman times had more words for different types of animals, and that they did not have the lexical separation between meat and the animal. But as I do not like to be a sourpuss and completely rain on the parade, there are some pairs of words that do have etymological divisions that can be traced back to Norman times. The words pillow and cushion are Germanic and French in origin respectively. Pillow is the ordinary workaday item, and cushion is the fancy decorative one. And that is a distinction that has been around in the English language since the 1200s. So there you have it. Thank you for listening.